Hey everyone, this is Mark Treichel with an emergency episode of With Flying Colors. It's an emergency because NCUA conserved a credit union today and they just announced it. I got an email. Let's see, when did my email come in? I got an email, NCUA Express at 12:03. I'm recording this 1 hour and 15 minutes later, 1:18 on Wednesday. And they conserved a credit union by the name of, it's in the Western region, Alders Gate, charter number 150682, assets listed of $10,577,000, 811 members, and the CEO's name is Marilyn Sullins, and the credit union was conserved, and which used to only happen on Fridays because it was easy to close the books. This might be a church credit union potentially, and maybe they weren't open, so it made it easier to do it in the middle of the day on Wednesday or at the close of business on Wednesday, which may have been noon or the morning. In any event, the press release, June 18th, the NCUA today placed Alders Gate Federal Credit Union in Marion, Illinois into conservatorship. Member services will continue while the NCUA works to resolve issues affecting the credit union's operations. Member deposits at Aldersgate Federal Credit Union remain protected by the NCUA Share Insurance Fund, the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund administered by the NCUA. The Share Insurance Fund protects individual accounts at federally insured credit unions up to $250,000. Members' interest in all joint accounts combined is also insured up to $250,000. The Share Insurance Fund separately protects IRA and Keogh retirement accounts up to $250,000. The Share Insurance Fund has the backing of the full faith and credit of the United States, although that's actually implied if you go back to the NGN days, but that's another story. They do have the full credit, but it's a nuanced interpretation of the full credit. Not as clean as the FDIC's full faith and credit, but I digress. It talks about how the members may conduct financial transactions via phone by calling the NCUA Assistant Management Center Monday through Thursday. Those calls will be routed to the appropriate specialist. Members can continue to conduct financial transactions such as depositing funds, making loan payments, and requesting share withdrawals during the conservatorship. Members with questions about the conservatorship may review the Aldersgate Federal Credit Union's frequently asked questions posted on the NCUA website. Members with questions about their share insurance can find more information at the share insurance coverage section of the NCUA website. And then it goes on to say Aldersgate Federal Credit Union is a federally insured credit union with 811 members and reports assets of $10.6 million, according to the credit union's most recent call report. Aldersgate Federal Credit Union serves the ministerial and probationary members, full-time employees, local pastors, clergy persons, and diocese. So it's diocese. I don't know the word diaconal ministers under appointment of the Bishop of the Illinois Great Rivers Conference of the United Methodist Church. So they took it over, and looking at the financial statement, let's see, I pulled down the FPR as of March. They had $10.3 million in loans, $260,000 in total cash. Key ratios, net worth ratio, 10.9% compared to the peer of about 15. So they're in the 27th percentile. There is one stat that does speak volumes. Their income, 1.27%, 127 basis points. And as of March, December, it was 55 basis points. Previous December, 65. Previous December, 58. Previous December, 46. So it's making money. High loan to asset ratio. In March, it was 97%. 98, 97, 93, 85, going back to the end of years in 2021. And let's see if this number stands out to you, listeners and watchers. Delinquent loans. They're in the first percentile. Nobody's better. At the end of March, they had 0 delinquencies. The end of December 2024, 0 delinquencies. End of December 2023, 0 delinquencies. End of December 2022, 0 delinquencies. End of December 2021, 0 delinquencies. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of flipping a coin 15 times in a row and always coming up heads? What are the odds of having a family of 13 and they're all girls or they're all boys? What are the odds that there's zero delinquency at this credit union and it was conserved on a Wednesday and it's a church credit union? I think there's a little bit more delinquency than zero. And that is something that NCUA watches. They watch if somebody reports zero delinquency, or they used to, and it would seem to be a red flag that would have caused potentially a deeper dive. Or I could be wrong. The credit union could have been abandoned. Maybe the field membership decided they didn't want the credit union. But my gut is telling me the numbers are not what they seem. My gut is telling me the worst case scenario in some of these instances is there's two sets of records, and the credit union isn't 10 million, it's much bigger, and there's a second set where the manager was stealing money or someone at the credit union was stealing money. I don't want to indicate anybody in particular here, but those are the typical scenarios. Now, another big takeaway for me is that this is the first live action where we've seen Chairman Hauptman take an action as the full board. A conservatorship action has to be signed off on the board. They've said publicly, he has the full authority. Now, not that this credit union will, but a credit union could sue. They can't use the funds of the credit union because they're no longer the credit union. But you can contest. I think it's a 10-day window you have to file a contestment in court. You could argue that Hauptman doesn't have the authority because he's not a quorum. Meanwhile, they could liquidate the credit union and have nothing left. But the reality is, this is really, in my mind, the first public position where Hauptman is saying, yep, I've been saying I've got these authorities, and I just took an action of the full board. I guess it's a good test case because it's small. I would still argue that there's a pretty compelling argument, one argued by by Harper and Otska, that a quorum is more than one. And NCUA had previously, if you listen to some of my past podcasts, I talked about how when Dennis Dollar was there and I was there as the deputy executive director, they started doing briefings. That's where the insurance fund briefing was born. But they advised Dollar not to take any actions on regulations because they didn't believe he had the authority to do that. Now, legal opinions changed. The act hasn't changed substantively, but board member who wants to get to one position, sometimes they stretch their interpretations. And I'm not saying that's what's happened here. Maybe general counsel is saying, hey, we've taken another fresh look at it, and you do have these authorities. In any event, conservatorship action takes a vote of the board, which is very interesting. So it's going to be interesting to watch. They don't say a lot publicly about these. There might be a postmortem that gets released if there's a certain dollar cost. The Inspector General of NCUA will have to do a postmortem if the cost, I believe theirs is over 10 million. NCUA's Division of Insurance does it, I think, if it's over 2 or 4 million. In any event, it's going to be a long time before we get to see any details here. Hopefully it's not something that costs the insurance fund too much, but my guess is it's very possible, probable, likely, potentially, that there could be fraud here that led to this, because zero delinquency in 5 years, I'm not going to buy that. That just doesn't make sense. Let's see. And charge-offs. So no charge-offs either. Amazing. Quite amazing. All right. In that regard, I saw another thing. I went over to LinkedIn while I was looking at that, and the FDIC announced that they are having a full board meeting on June 26th at 10 a.m., and they published their agenda. I went to the link of the agenda, and something caught my eye as it relates to NCUA. Anyway, they're going to talk about minutes of a previous board meeting and some customer identification program rule exemption order. Their third item is a summary report, status report, and report of actions taken pursuant to authority delegated by the board of directors. So they're going to talk about actions that the office took, talk about actions that the general counsel took, talk about actions that the regents took. I've talked about here publicly, it's essentially the Bible of what the NCUA board has delegated. They say the regional directors have the authority to write letters to credit unions and supervise the credit unions to do the exams. They say the general counsel has the authority to do X, Y, and Z. The E&I director can do this. The office of the executive director and the executive director can do this. And they talk about, by the way, how all these delegations flow through the chain of command, which is a way to put political pressure on the individual areas of operations if they don't believe they're following the delegations or doing what needs to be done. But what This also triggered me to think about was actions taken by the NCUA board by notation vote. Those things are not public, and some of those things, they say they have to be done in a closed session. There's so many things since Harper came in, Todd Harper, previous board chair, previous board member, still suing to get back on the board, where they started basically not having closed session board meetings, where you could see they were taking a personnel action or you could see they were doing an appeal. They've done all those behind the scenes, and there should be some method of getting that information reported. I don't know. I'm going to watch this FDIC board meeting or the follow-up on it to see if that's something where they report something there. Maybe I'll make a request to NCUA saying, hey, what's going on with all your notation votes lately? All right. So what else? There was one other thing that popped up here. I talked about the conservatorship. I talked about the FDIC and their agenda. NCUA is not having a board meeting in June because I've talked about this in the previous board meeting. They are going to have one in July where they'll probably talk about the budget and such, potentially maybe do a cybersecurity briefing. If it were me, I would have at least one briefing each board meeting to show that we're relevant. However, conserving a credit union definitely shows the relevance of the board, and I'm a bit surprised that they decided to do that. There must have been something so compelling that they felt they needed to. It wasn't a tie goes to the runner type conservatorship. It must have been something that really needed to happen, and they decided, okay, this is the one we're going to test, that Hauptman really truly does have the ability to vote for a full board. And I guess 1 out of 1 is a quorum, right? That's their argument. We'll see if that gets addressed in the lawsuits by Harper and Oatska. I'm not really going to go into the lawsuits on Harper and Oatska. I did some research on it, but again, they went to court. They made their positions. The administration made their positions. They didn't say when they'd make a decision. The administration did argue, I guess, that even if they were wrong to fire him, that they shouldn't put Harper and Oatska back so they could win by default if that's what the judge decides makes sense. And I'm hearing some rumblings about who the next board members could be, and I'll just leave it at that. But I think if what I heard on the grapevine is true, I think it could be cool. All right. I have a couple other announcements I'm going to make on a podcast Tuesday on some changes. I like to reinvent what the podcast does every year to keep it fresh for me and hopefully fresh for you. Which part of the thing is we're doing more of these YouTube videos linked to the podcast. I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that, and I'll have a podcast on Tuesday, which will announce another couple nuances to the podcast that I think you will enjoy. I know I'm going to enjoy doing them, and stay tuned for that. All right. I'm going to get back to work here, but I wanted to get this podcast out. As always, I appreciate you listening. I hope you'll listen again soon or watch. And this is Mark Treichel signing off with flying colors.